The sand was black, not the golden or white sand of tropical paradise, but volcanic black, coarse and hot beneath the morning sun. It shifted under every footfall, making each step an effort, each advance a struggle against the island itself. The air tasted of sulfur and salt, a bitter combination that coated the throat and stung the eyes. Mount Suribachi loomed to the south, a dark fortress of rock watching over the beaches with ancient indifference. Private First Class Robert Dunham crouched behind a disabled Amtrak, his flamethrower strapped across his back like a grotesque mechanical parasite. 70 pounds of steel tanks, rubber hoses, and napalm-thickened fuel. The weapon was heavy, awkward, and terrifying, both to carry and to face. Ahead, perhaps 40 yards up the terraced slope, a concrete pillbox sat silent and nearly invisible, its firing slit a dark horizontal line barely distinguishable from the volcanic rock surrounding it. For 20 minutes, his platoon had been pinned down by machine gun fire coming from that aperture. Marines lay dead and dying on the black sand. Rifle fire was useless. Grenades fell short. Artillery had been called in, but the shells merely scarred the reinforced concrete without penetrating. The pillbox was impregnable, or so it seemed. Dunham felt the weight of the flamethrower shift as he adjusted his stance. Inside that bunker, Japanese soldiers waited in reinforced darkness, protected by 3 feet of concrete and steel, confident that their position was unassailable. They had prepared for this invasion for months. They had built fortifications that could withstand naval bombardment. They had positioned interlocking fields of fire that turned every approach into a killing zone. They had committed themselves to a defense so fanatical, so absolute, that surrender was not merely discouraged, it was unthinkable. What they had not prepared for was fire. Not the fire of artillery shells or the flash of grenades, but something older, something primal, the kind of fire that did not merely damage, it consumed. The kind of fire that turned concrete bunkers into ovens and made depth of fortification irrelevant. The kind of fire that reached into the darkest spaces and left nothing behind but ash and silence. Dunham's squad leader gave the signal. He rose from cover and began moving forward, each step sinking slightly into the loose volcanic sand, his breath coming in short bursts through the filter mask. Behind him, 2 riflemen provided covering fire, their rounds sparking uselessly off the concrete face of the pillbox. The machine gun inside barked in response, kicking up geysers of black sand to his left. He kept moving. 30 yards, 25, 20. Then he stopped, braced himself, and raised the nozzle of the flamethrower toward the firing slit. His thumb pressed the igniter. A small pilot flame flickered to life at the tip of the wand. Then he squeezed the trigger. A stream of jellied gasoline erupted from the nozzle, ignited in mid-air, and became a roaring tongue of orange flame that lanced across the distance and poured directly into the narrow opening of the pillbox. The fire did not stop at the entrance. It flowed like liquid, seeking every corner, every crevice, filling the interior with superheated air and burning fuel. The machine gun fell silent. Smoke, thick, black, chemical, began pouring from ventilation slits that had been invisible moments before. For 5 seconds, Dunham held the trigger down. 5 seconds that felt like an eternity. Then he released, and the fire died. The pillbox smoldered, silent and dead. No screams, no movement, just smoke rising from a tomb. His platoon advanced past the position without slowing. There were dozens more bunkers ahead, hundreds across the island, and Private Dunham's flamethrower had just proven that none of them were safe. The Japanese defensive strategy on Iwo Jima was not born of desperation, but of cold, calculated pragmatism. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander of the island's garrison, understood that Japan could not win the battle. The Americans had overwhelming air superiority, naval superiority, and numerical superiority. A traditional defense, meeting the invaders at the beaches, launching banzai charges, would result in swift annihilation. Instead, Kuribayashi designed something far more lethal, a defense in depth, built around hundreds of fortified positions, interconnected by tunnels, supplied by underground depots, and manned by soldiers who understood they would never leave the island alive. Every bunker was reinforced with steel and concrete. Every cave was stocked with ammunition and water. Every position was sited to cover at least 2 others, creating interlocking fields of fire that forced the Americans to attack each fortification individually. The plan was not to win, but to kill, to inflict so many casualties that the American public would recoil from the cost of invading the Japanese home islands. Every day the Marines were delayed was a victory. Every American life taken was a strategic gain. Kuribayashi forbade suicidal banzai charges. He ordered his men to stay hidden, stay protected, and make the Americans pay for every yard of volcanic rock. And for the first days of the invasion, the strategy worked with horrifying efficiency. Marines landed on beaches that seemed deserted, only to be caught in pre-sighted kill zones. Artillery hidden deep in the island's volcanic tunnels rained shells on landing zones. Machine gun nests, invisible until they opened fire, cut down entire squads. The black sand, which offered no cover and made movement exhausting, became a graveyard. The Japanese soldiers inside those bunkers believed they were untouchable. They had concrete walls several feet thick. They had reinforced steel doors. They had ventilation systems that allowed them to survive even direct artillery hits. They could fire on the Americans while remaining almost entirely protected. As long as they stayed inside their fortifications, they could hold out for weeks, perhaps months. But concrete walls could not stop what was coming. The flamethrower was not a new weapon. Variations of it had been used in World War I, crude devices that sprayed burning liquid across short distances, often as dangerous to the operator as to the enemy. But by 1945, American engineers had refined the technology into something far more effective. The M2 flamethrower could project a stream of jellied gasoline up to 40 yards with devastating accuracy. The napalm, a mixture of gasoline and a gelling agent, stuck to surfaces and burned at temperatures exceeding 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. It could not be easily extinguished, it consumed oxygen, and it made enclosed spaces into death traps. The Marine Corps had recognized the value of flamethrowers in the Pacific Campaign, particularly after the brutal fighting on Peleliu and Saipan, where Japanese bunkers had proven nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. Flamethrower operators, called Zippos after the famous lighter, were formed into specialized assault teams. They trained extensively, learning to approach fortifications under fire, to judge distances, to deliver bursts of flame with precision. But training could not fully prepare them for the reality of the weapon. Carrying a flamethrower marked a man as a priority target. Japanese soldiers understood what the device could do, and they focused their fire on anyone carrying the distinctive twin tanks. The life expectancy of a flamethrower operator in combat was measured in minutes, not hours. Many were killed before they could fire a single burst. Those who survived long enough to use their weapon often became targets for concentrated fire the moment they ignited. Yet, despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, there was never a shortage of volunteers. The Marines understood that bunkers could not be taken without flamethrowers. They understood that their brothers were dying in the black sand because machine guns in concrete pillboxes could fire with impunity. The flamethrower operators were not suicidal, they were pragmatic. They carried the weapon because someone had to and because it worked. On Iwo Jima, that pragmatism became doctrine. Every assault team included flamethrower operators. Every attack on a fortified position followed the same pattern: suppress the enemy with rifle and machine gun fire, advance engineers with demolition charges, and bring forward the flamethrowers for the final assault. It was brutal, methodical, and devastatingly effective. Inside the bunkers, the Japanese defenders experienced something no amount of preparation could mitigate. They had trained for artillery bombardment, the concussive shock, the dust, the ringing silence afterward. They had prepared for grenade attacks, for satchel charges, even for close-quarters combat, but they had not, could not, prepare for fire that flowed like water and burned like molten metal. When a flamethrower burst entered a bunker through a firing slit or ventilation shaft, the effect was instantaneous and total. The napalm did not merely ignite, it exploded into flame, filling the enclosed space with fire and superheated gas. Oxygen was consumed in seconds. Men who were not directly touched by the flames suffocated or died from heat shock. Those who were touched by the burning gel experienced injuries so severe that survival was not possible. There was no defense. Concrete walls which stopped bullets and shrapnel meant nothing. Depth of fortification, which protected against bombs and shells, became a liability. The deeper the bunker, the harder it was for the heat and smoke to escape. Steel doors which could be barricaded against infantry assault were bypassed entirely as flame poured through firing slits and air vents. Japanese after-action reports, those that survived, documented the psychological impact. Soldiers stationed in bunkers began to experience paralyzing dread when they heard the distinctive sound of flamethrower ignition, a low whoosh followed by a roaring hiss. Some positions were abandoned before the flamethrowers even fired, their defenders fleeing into the tunnel systems rather than face immolation. Others fought to the last, but with increasing desperation, focusing all fire on the flamethrower operators in a frantic attempt to kill them before they could reach effective range. But the Americans adapted. Flamethrower operators advanced behind tanks, using the armored vehicles as mobile cover. They attacked at night when their approach was harder to detect. They coordinated with demolition teams who would blast open ventilation shafts to give the flames a clear path into the bunker's interior. The tactics evolved with brutal efficiency, each day bringing new methods to deliver fire into spaces designed to be impregnable. The flamethrower became a symbol of something larger than its tactical utility. It represented the collision between two fundamentally different approaches to warfare. The Japanese had built their defense on the principle of static fortification, the belief that prepared positions held by determined men could exhaust an attacker's will to continue. It was a defensive philosophy rooted in siegecraft, in the ancient understanding that walls protected and depth preserved. But the Americans brought a different philosophy, one rooted not in endurance but in problem solving. When bunkers proved resistant to rifles, they brought flamethrowers. When tunnels protected enemy forces, they pumped in fire and smoke. When fortifications seemed impregnable, they developed specialized weapons designed for a single purpose, to negate that impermeability. The American approach was not to match Japanese determination with equal fanaticism, but to render that determination irrelevant through technological and tactical innovation. The flamethrower was the embodiment of this approach. It was a weapon that ignored traditional defensive advantages. Thickness of walls did not matter. Depth of position did not matter. The willingness of the defenders to die did not matter. The flame came regardless, and when it came, it left nothing behind. To the Japanese soldier, this was not merely a tactical defeat, it was a philosophical one. The bunkers represented the accumulated wisdom of military engineering, the sacrifice of labor and resources, the commitment to a defensive strategy that had been carefully planned and executed. And yet a single Marine with a flamethrower could reduce months of preparation to smoke and ash in a matter of seconds. The realization spread through the garrison. Bunkers were not safe. Tunnels were not safe. Concrete and steel could not protect against fire. The Americans had found the answer to every defense, and that answer burned with a heat that turned stone into an oven. The statistics from Iwo Jima reflected the flamethrower's devastating effectiveness. Of approximately 21,000 Japanese defenders on the island, fewer than 200 were taken prisoner. The vast majority died in their fortifications, many of them victims of flamethrower assaults.
Marine Corps records documented hundreds of bunkers neutralized by flame, pillboxes, caves, reinforced buildings, artillery positions. In many cases, demolition charges and grenades had failed to dislodge the defenders. The flamethrower succeeded where conventional weapons could not. But the cost was severe. Flamethrower operators suffered casualty rates far exceeding the infantry average. On Iwo Jima alone, dozens were killed or wounded while attempting to close with enemy positions. The distinctive profile made them targets. The need to approach within 40 yards, often closer, meant exposure to concentrated fire. And the psychological burden of wielding such a weapon, of being responsible for deaths so absolute and so terrible, weighed on the men who survived. Private First Class Robert Dunham, who cleared that first pillbox on the morning of February 19th, would go on to neutralize 7 more bunkers over the following week. On February 26th, while approaching a cave entrance on the northern end of the island, he was struck by machine gun fire and killed instantly. His flamethrower, still loaded, was recovered and passed to another operator. The weapon continued its work. The mission continued. The island was secured, yard by yard, bunker by bunker, until no defensive positions remained. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. When it ended, the entire island was in American hands. The cost was staggering. Nearly 7,000 Marines killed and 19,000 wounded, making it one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. But the strategic objective was achieved. Iwo Jima became a base for emergency landings and fighter escorts, saving the lives of thousands of B-29 crews flying missions over Japan. And the flamethrower, that terrible and efficient weapon, became a permanent part of the American arsenal. It would be used again in Okinawa, in the Philippines, in Korea, in Vietnam. Wherever fortified positions existed, wherever defenders believed that depth and concrete could protect them, the flamethrower proved otherwise. There was a bitter irony in the weapon's effectiveness. The Japanese had believed that fortification was the answer to American firepower. They had spent enormous resources building defenses designed to withstand the heaviest bombardment. They had committed their soldiers to positions that offered protection at the cost of mobility. They had transformed Iwo Jima into a fortress. But in doing so, they had also created their own trap. The bunkers that protected Japanese soldiers from artillery also trapped them inside when the flame came. The tunnels that allowed for concealed movement became chimneys that drew fire and smoke into every connected chamber. The reinforced doors that kept Marines out also kept defenders in, preventing escape when the interior filled with flame. The fortifications, built at such cost and effort, became tombs, and the flame that filled them was not just a weapon, it was a message that no defense was absolute, that innovation could overcome preparation, that the advantage lay not with those who built the strongest walls, but with those who found new ways to breach them.
The flamethrower's roar, the distinctive sound the Japanese soldiers came to dread, was the sound of that message being delivered. It was the sound of fortifications becoming irrelevant, the sound of concrete walls offering no sanctuary, the sound of a defensive strategy collapsing under the weight of its own limitations. In the decades following the war, military historians would analyze Iwo Jima through the lens of strategy, logistics, and grand tactics. They would debate whether the island's capture was necessary, whether the cost was justified, whether alternative approaches might have been more effective. But for the men who fought there, both American and Japanese, the battle was experienced not as a strategic abstraction, but as a series of immediate, visceral encounters. Encounters where survival depended on split-second decisions, on the effectiveness of weapons, on the courage to advance into fire. The flamethrower defined many of those encounters. It was a weapon that forced a terrible choice on its operators: carry it and become a target, or leave it behind and watch comrades die assaulting bunkers that could not be taken any other way. Most chose to carry it. Most understood the odds. Many died doing so. But in their sacrifice and in the terrible efficiency of the weapon they carried, the course of the battle shifted. Bunkers that might have held for days fell in minutes. Positions that might have required weeks of siege warfare were neutralized in hours. The Japanese defensive strategy, so carefully constructed, so meticulously executed, met a weapon it could not counter and a will it could not break. The flame did not discriminate. It consumed the fortifications, the defenders, and the illusion that concrete and steel could protect against American ingenuity. What remained after the fire passed was silence and ash, and the inexorable advance of Marines who had learned that no bunker was impregnable, no defense was absolute, and no fortification could stop a weapon designed specifically to render fortification meaningless. On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secure. The volcanic island, once a fortress bristling with hidden guns and concrete bunkers, was silent. The black sand, soaked with blood and scorched by flame, stretched empty under a Pacific sun. Mount Suribachi, crowned now by an American flag, stood as a monument not just to victory, but to transformation. The flamethrower had not won the battle alone. Artillery, naval gunfire, tanks, aircraft, and the relentless courage of individual Marines had all played essential roles. But the flamethrower had solved a problem that no other weapon could solve. It had reached into the deepest fortifications and turned protection into prison. It had made depth irrelevant and concrete meaningless. It had proven that no matter how thoroughly an enemy prepared, innovation could find an answer. For the Japanese soldiers who believed their bunkers would protect them, the lesson came too late and at too great a cost. They had built fortresses and manned them with disciplined, determined defenders. They had done everything their doctrine and their honor required. And yet, when the Marines came with flamethrowers, all that preparation became ash. The flame that cleared those bunkers was not just fire. It was the manifestation of a nation's industrial capacity, its scientific innovation, its willingness to adapt and overcome. It was the product of factories that could produce specialized weapons in quantity, of training programs that could prepare operators, of tactical doctrine that could integrate new technology into combat operations within months of its deployment. The Japanese expected their guns to stop the Marines. They expected their concrete walls to withstand assault. They expected their determination to outlast American will. Instead, they found that walls could be breached, that guns could be silenced, and that determination alone was not enough when the enemy brought fire. The flamethrower's roar echoed across Iwo Jima for 36 days. When it finally fell silent, the island belonged to America. And the lesson, the terrible, undeniable lesson, was written in the ashes of every bunker, every pillbox, every fortification that promised safety but delivered only fire. In the end, the bunkers did not protect, the concrete did not endure, and the flames, orange and roaring and absolute, cleared every shadow and left nothing behind but the truth that in modern warfare, no defense is permanent, and innovation burns through tradition like fire through darkness.